The black area in the picture were all covered by virgin forests. When the Mayflower first arrived in America, forests were covering 50% of the land in North America. However, in the following 400 years, they had largely disappeared. According to Statistics from American Forests, A History of Resilience and Recovery, in 260 years' time, from 1650 to 1910, the U.S. has destroyed 126 square miles of forest, 13 times the size of the UK. The amount of CO2 released was beyond calculation. All this was exacerbating climate change and undermining agricultural production. Soils and fire can rapidly raze a forest, but to wipe out the forest cost-efficiently, the most effective tool is to develop the economy. The forest is a resource as much as a driver for economy. Since the 1850s, the U.S. was felling trees to boost the economy by expanding the railway network and reaching into the Midwest. Settlers were brought in from the East Coast. In 1910, the railway companies had felled 62 acres of forest. 124 million sleepers were made, with 4 billion cubic feet of wood at its cost, which accounted for 10% of the total wood production that year. Meanwhile, the U.S. launched a series of low-price land sale and subsidies, encouraging the newcomers to force out native Indians, turning forests and grasslands into farms and ranches. In 1850, sawmilling was the second largest industry in the U.S. after flour processing, accounted for 6% of the total manufacturing output. In 1870, 12.8 billion cubic feet of timber were cut. In 1900, it had increased to 36 billion cubic feet. To develop these lands, it takes more than colonization, but also bison killing. Before the 19th century, more than 60 million bison once lived freely in the Great Plains. Their numbers have declined rapidly since the 1810s, down to less than 1,000 by the end of the 19th century. This animal, once spread all across the Great Plains of North America, now is an endangered species in the United States and Canada. At the same time, there were new forest killers. People consume more and more meat. In Europe and America, people raise cattle, sheep, chickens, and ducks. This requires the feed output to keep up, especially the protein-rich soybean meal made from soy. But meanwhile, the forestry firms slowed down their rate of deforestation. There were no NGO protests for the environment. The reason was actually quite simple. As of 1920, road building, deforestation, bison killing, and homesteading had wiped out 96% of the virgin forests in the northeast and midwest of the United States. Among them, there were 4,000-year-old trees and precious redwoods. The forests of value had been depleted, so they moved to somewhere else. As a result, the original vegetation of the grasslands in North America were rapidly destroyed. Agriculture corporations began to develop large-scale farmlands in the central area. By 1969, soybean acreage in the U.S. was 26 times larger than that of 1924. It stretched across 30 states in America, and soybean production skyrocketed. The Great Plains contributed most to soybeans, wheat, corn, beef, and milk to the U.S. But it also caused a large-scale sandstorm that swept many states in the 1930s. To this day, the capitalists are reluctant to cut its soybean production, even if the vegetation is severely damaged, because they want to sell a large number of these soybeans to China in order to grab wealth. In recent decades, the Chinese people sweated to pursue their happiness and freedom, and earned a higher level of consumption. China's demand for imported soybeans took off, and a greater awareness of environmental protection ensued. To protect the Earth environment, China not only promotes large-scale forestation on its own land, thus becoming the country with the highest forest growth rate and area in the world in the past 20 years. In the principle of building a community of shared future for mankind, China is also willing to offer help to the U.S. on environmental issues. Since 2018, for the purpose of protecting the severely damaged forests and grasslands in the U.S., China chose to shift the larger share of its soybean imports to Brazil, where the forest coverage was much higher than that of the US. So as to alleviate the ecological pressure of the US and promote economy in Brazil, a win-win solution. It will fundamentally help the US to return farmlands to forests and grasslands. Despite these great efforts China has made, the tremendous livestock industry stayed an obstacle to the afforestation of soybean fields. These soybeans will eventually become meat, eggs, and milk for the states through the inefficient secondary consumers in the food chain. Therefore, you see in the era of economic globalization, a Brazilian butterfly flutters its wings. It may not necessarily cause a tornado in Texas, but compared with other countries, the US, with its largest per capita consumption of meat and milk in the world, could in fact impact on the survival of North American forests. Yes, this food chain composed of soybeans, beef, and carnivores is the most efficient machine for destroying forests. When you understand how it works, you will notice whether its agricultural production or nutrition intake may not necessarily require such a high cost borne by the forests. At present, the per capita consumption of meat in the US ranks first in the world, about 120 kilograms per person per year, with a third being beef, which consumes lots of grain and produces a huge amount of carbon emissions. By changing Americans' diet and food patterns, its meat consumption structure and per capita consumption can be adjusted to that of Japan. By replacing some of the meat and milk with soy products for protein intake, the US will not only have healthier people, also with the same size population, 1/3 of the soybean farmlands could be saved, so they can be restored to forests and grasslands. This is a reason why soybean products like tofu are viable solutions as a source of protein to improve Americans' diet and help build a more sustainable food chain. Over the past century, soy products have been introduced to the States, such as dougan, douchi, sweet or salty tofu nao, fuju, etc. They can help reduce energy waste on the food chain, and people are striving for more and more companies to join in, because in the production and consumption of palm oil, soybean, beef, paper, and other products, it should not be the forests to pay the price, but our greed and overconsumption. For consumers, compared with previous passive involvement of deforestation, in fact, a healthy, sustainable, and environmental-friendly food chain helps to uphold your right to know for the source of healthier proteins. Similarly, these soybean products, which were far from the spotlight, not only present sustainability, also bring us options. You may choose the healthy soybean products and avoid being an unwitting aid to deforestation. Businesses could reduce the risks of deforestation by adjusting the food chain, so there will be no chance left for you to destroy any forest. With tofu, make America green again.